Every week, at least one patient asks me if they're going to wake up with memory problems after their surgery. We call problems like this post-operative cognitive deficits, or POCD, which may affect up to 30 to 40% of patients having surgery. Can medications like the white stuff or this package here change that risk and make it safer for your brain under anesthesia? Are these problems even caused by the anesthesia itself, or by the surgery, or by the disease that you're having the surgery for? I'll share the latest research with you so that if you or a loved one are having surgery, you can save as many brain cells as possible through the experience. I'll share what you should discuss with your anesthesiologist before surgery and whether what's in this package might be able to help save your memory. Many studies show that post-operative cognitive deficits can happen regardless of the specific type of anesthesia, whether it's white stuff, whether it's clear stuff, or even if it's anesthesia gas through the mask. And this suggests that some of the memory problems might be from the surgery itself, like in response to the giant inflammatory response that your body has to being cut open. Or maybe it's because of the underlying disease process like cancer, which can also be very pro-inflammatory, and those inflammatory molecules can cross the blood-brain barrier and potentially wreak havoc in your brain where your memories are living. The problem with these studies is that I don't believe you can generalize all patients in one study. Like in this study, it showed no difference in post-operative delirium in patients who had surgery with sedation or without sedation. If you're not getting any sedation, it's not likely to be the cause of any POCD. Many of these studies specifically look at post-operative delirium instead of post-operative cognitive deficits. Post-operative delirium is when patients are kicking or screaming or not in touch with their surroundings. They don't know who's in the room with them, for example. Post-operative delirium in the short term increases the risk of long-term post-operative cognitive deficits, and it's one reason why we want to pay attention to risks for post-operative delirium, because they may well increase the risk of post-operative cognitive deficits down the line as well. But we're still stuck with a wide variety of patients who are getting surgery. Like, what about patients who are over 65 versus under 65? What about different types of surgery, like hip fracture versus cancer? It's simply too difficult to run a granular trial with enough people to get the data that's relevant specifically to you. Do you know anyone who struggled with their memory after surgery? Let me know in the comments below so others can learn from their experience. Now, from my perspective, intuition tells me that anything we can do to reduce the burden of the medical coma, which is what general anesthesia is, can stand a chance at reducing the risk of things going wrong in your brain. It's no surprise that some studies totally support this, like this study in patients having knee and hip surgery, where the risk of delirium was nearly half in patients getting a spinal anesthetic. A spinal anesthetic is where we use high doses of lidocaine to fully numb part of your body so that you don't need to get any IV anesthesia to turn off your brain to safely tolerate the surgery. That's what this package is for, by the way, and I'm going to show you what's inside and how it might help the right patient have a safer brain experience with surgery, so stick around for that part. In addition to the question of spinal anesthetics to avoid general anesthesia is the question of ketamine. Ketamine may play a large role in post-operative cognitive dysfunction and post-operative depression, which can worsen symptoms in the enormous number of patients with pre-existing depression presenting for surgery. This is because of the shared risks of POCD and post-operative depression. Ketamine can have psychedelic-like effects, which might be concerning for causing delirium in the setting of surgery. If ketamine is not used carefully, like just slamming it into a patient, that can be a valid concern. But in some cases, I believe ketamine can have a helpful role, like in this study, looking at POCD after cardiac surgery, where ketamine was shown to reduce some of the effects of post-operative cognitive dysfunction after surgery. And in this study that looked at ketamine's role to potentially reduce depressive mood symptoms after surgery. Though interestingly, even though the mood scores were better, the mood itself didn't always correlate. But plenty of other studies have demonstrated consistent antidepressive effects of ketamine after surgery. And this is especially the case with postpartum depression in women delivering by C-section, for example, where IV ketamine can significantly reduce the depressive burden. And postpartum depression is serious because of the effect it has on mom, on the family, and on baby, and this can affect up to 1 in 5 women after childbirth. Do you know anyone who's received ketamine for their depression? How did it go? Let me know in the comments below. As you may know, IV ketamine is a big part of my longevity clinic's work here in San Francisco. And I'm very passionate about our mental health as a foundation of our health span and lifespan. Lastly, there are other medications that can also affect our brain during the time of surgery. For example, we know that anticholinergics, steroids, and benzodiazepines might increase the risk of delirium and potentially postoperative cognitive dysfunction. And other medications like gabapentin, excessively high doses of opioids, and scopolamine can also increase that risk. So as a specialist in longevity medicine, I obviously care about my patients' long-term outcomes months and years after their surgery. So I'll share my approach to help save as many brain cells as possible during the surgery experience. And just as a reminder, if you're learning something new, please share what you're learning with your loved ones and remember to hit that like button. And you can always learn about my longevity center in San Francisco by visiting our website, www.claris-health.com. So here's my approach. If we can fully numb the surgical site with this and avoid sedation and general anesthesia, and the patient is amenable to this approach, let's do that. Remember that for general anesthesia, we really need to put your brain to sleep so that your body can tolerate breathing tubes and tools like this that go into the back of your mouth so that you can safely undergo the anesthesia. And some of those medications may come at a cost that we can avoid altogether by numbing your body, such as with a spinal anesthetic or with a really solid nerve block. But not all surgeries are amenable to this depending on where the surgery is and the surgical approach. And not all patients are amenable to being awake or semi-awake for their surgery. So it's not about forcing my plan, but about sharing the data with the patient to let them make an informed decision. If the patient is at risk of post-operative depression, like if they have a history of depression or medical PTSD, it might be worthwhile to discuss the role of ketamine as part of their anesthesia. It depends heavily on the type of surgery and the patient's openness to using that anesthetic. If a woman is at risk for postpartum depression, it's very reasonable to discuss IV ketamine, but you have to be very careful to set the expectation because if you give them a little bit of IV ketamine, you might interfere with their first experiences with the newborn in those first few minutes after the baby comes out. So they need to have consented to this ahead of time. Otherwise, if possible, you want to avoid excessive steroids and anticholinergics or antihistamine agents like Benadryl. You also want to avoid benzodiazepines when safely possible. Many benzodiazepines like Ativan or Xanax or midazolam can help many anxious patients, but so can many safer alternative medications, and just taking time to speak with the patient to help them feel more comfortable and have realistic expectations. Sometimes that can help avoid unnecessary medications, especially in the vulnerable populations like the very young or the very old. Speaking of older patients, remember that they also have lower opioid requirements, so it's very easy to accidentally overdose them and increase their risk of delirium and potentially postoperative cognitive deficits in the long run. You also want to avoid meperidine or Demerol because of its potentially neurotoxic and anticholinergic effects. And you want to use alternatives to delirium-inducing medications whenever safely possible, like turning to dexmedetomidine, celecoxib, or acetaminophen, which is also called paracetamol outside the United States. It's also super interesting that methylene blue, a 120-year-old medication, has been shown to reduce the risk of some postoperative cognitive disorders in certain patients. So this is very reasonable to discuss with your doctor. You also want to avoid massive blood pressure swings during surgery. Now your doctor will take care of this for you, but if you have a history of high blood pressure and you're taking medications, it's your responsibility to follow the directions on what medications to take and not take before surgery. So be sure to follow those directions for your safety. Your doctor should also avoid unnecessary anesthesia doses. It helps to be more calm coming into the operating room because the less anxiety one has, typically the lower the anesthesia requirements they have. And there are some patients who might have so much anxiety that they might actually ask for more and more anesthesia and unknowingly be hurting their own recovery. It's not necessarily that less is more, it's that the right dose of anesthesia is the right approach for you. Not too little and not too much. And for patients who specifically come to my clinic before surgery, we discuss more specific strategies around optimizing mitochondrial function, either with NAD+ or methylene blue, or enhancing mood or physical activity and endurance, and nutrition to help give the body the best chance at recovering quickly from surgery. Now let's finally open this up. We need to remove all of this sterilely if we're actually going to put this into a patient, because this is going to go into their central nervous system, directly into the cerebrospinal fluid around their spinal cord. This is our sterile area, medication labels, a drape to put around the patient so we only expose the hole where we're going to do the procedure. This keeps the rest of the area clean. Some overly expensive towels to keep the area dry. An iodine-based antiseptic, which we open up and pour into this tray over here so that we can clean the patient's back. This stuff can seriously stain, so we want to put it aside. We have these 3 prep pads that we want to clean the skin with around the area we're going to do the procedure 3 times to keep it very sterile to minimize the risk of an infection inside the central nervous system around the spinal cord. Next is some local anesthetic to numb the skin with. We crack it open with some of these little gauzes here so that we don't cut our fingers. And then we have this very special glass syringe that gives us a very good tactile feel about what the pressure is like as we are injecting the local anesthetic next to the spinal cord and when we're withdrawing back on it. It's a very fancy syringe. We have to use a very special needle to draw up medication from the glass vial that has a filter so that we don't accidentally draw up any glass shards that might go into the patient's cerebrospinal fluid. You don't want to be injecting glass in someone's spinal cord. And then we have this needle, which is called an introducer, which is quite thick. After you've anesthetized the skin, you put this through the back and you introduce the longer spinal needle through it. The introducer is thick enough so that you can actually place the spinal needle through it, and this is what slowly inches closer and closer and closer towards the cerebrospinal fluid around your spinal cord. Once you puncture the last layer of tissue before it, you feel a pop, and then you pull out the stylet that's in here, and now you begin to inject your very fancy and purified and potent local anesthetic. You can see it dripping out of the end of the spinal needle there. And it's this local anesthetic that can be so powerful that it can numb the lower half of your body so that you can avoid the need for general anesthesia and being in that medical coma. Yay! Once you've injected the total dose, then you pull out the whole mechanism together and pull out the injector, and ta-da, you're done. And because there can be all sorts of diseases in people's cerebrospinal fluid, you do not want to touch this. You want to throw it away immediately and not poke anyone with all the sharp needles. If you learned something new, hit that like button and share what you've learned with your loved ones. Let me know in the comments below what questions you have. Be sure to check out my website at www.claris-health.com to learn more about how to protect your brain during surgery and enhance your longevity. And remember that you have more power over your health than you've probably ever been told.